Hello, this is Peter Ward. In this video I'm going to attempt to build a pipeline using some Python. We will start as before with a pretty much empty Synapse workspace. Just want to show you here that there is a default database, but there are no tables in it. There are no development resources, no pipelines. The only thing that I've set up in advance here is an Apache Spark pool, and I've called that Sparkle, and as you can see it's rather small, just testing size that could go up to hundreds of cores I think, but this is a cheap one for a demo. I'm going to start by developing. Now I'm not going to write any Python, I've cheated slightly here. I got some Python working in an external notebook. It's not a lot of Python. The purpose of this video is not to teach people to write Python. I connect that to the Spark pool so that I can run it against the cluster. It's a fairly simple bit of code here. You'll see essentially it just gets some JSON from a website and puts it into a data frame. Let's run that. The first thing it has to do just the first time is to connect to that Spark cluster and start up the cluster. So I'll skip over that minute or so and run the code. Let's have a look at what we got, and it's just this website gives us a bunch of test code, test JSON, which is actually quite useful, 500 rows. I'm just going to turn that into a Spark data frame, which is like a Pandas data frame, but anything I do on a Spark data frame executes on the Spark cluster and not on the notebook server. So same content there, and finally I'm going to write that into a database table called comments. And it will create a new table, because as we know there is at the moment no table. Notice this is actually running a Spark job. It gives me some indication of how it's executing the job, and I can actually dive into those links and get a lot more detail on the execution if you so desire. What's that done? That has created a database. Let's refresh. When I say database, what I mean is table. So it's created a comments table. Look, it has 5 columns, which is encouraging. We can run some SQL against it. And there we are. There's our data in SQL. So the Python appears to work, and it's written content into the lake using the Spark cluster. What I want to do next is see if I can turn that piece of code into a pipeline. A little bit of tidying up to do first. Let's what we're going to do is actually go back into the notebook. I'm going to temporarily add another code cell at the end just to clear out that database so that we can see that our pipeline is working. So I can get the Spark cluster to run a fragment of SQL for me, which avoids me having to write more Python, frankly. And we just go back and check that the database table has now disappeared. Indeed it has. That is super. Okay, and I'll get rid of that temporary code block, and then I can publish the notebook into the runtime environment. I can't have a pipeline out of it without doing that. So it's a very simple kind of change control mechanism here in the development workspace by default. This is not a full DevOps pipeline by any means. Anyway, so how do I turn this notebook into a pipeline? And well, there's a very useful little icon at the top here. I can drop it into an existing pipeline. I don't have any, so I'll create a new pipeline. Probably should have called my notebook something more meaningful than notebook 1. But let's call the pipeline something slightly more meaningful, like load comments. A couple of fields there I can fill in to describe it. Validation, not quite sure what it validates for, but we'll validate anyway. And then we'll add some code that tells us when it should run. If I choose the trigger, you can see where I've been doing some testing, but let's use a completely new trigger just to prove the point. This is how I define when I want it to run, on what condition. I'm going to use a scheduled trigger. I'm going to set it up for a few minutes time, so I will call it trigger 2110. It's in 3 minutes time, so working against the clock here now, guys. You can see there's a variety of options here in terms of scheduling. I can run it weekly, certain days of the week. Actually only going to run it once, so if I say every 15 days, then that won't come round again. Okay, and then finally have to publish the trigger. When that's ready, we have about 2 minutes to go. Let's just tidy up our workspace. Nice to confirm that's published. So if we go to monitor now and look at our trigger runs, first of all we'll see evidence of my previous runs. I'm not a complete amateur, I tried this before. That's our trigger has just run, our pipeline is now running. And again we have to slight delay here while it spins up and connects to the Spark cluster. Once that's done, which will just elide the database, refresh the database, see if the table is there. Of course it is. There's our table. With this time we've been running the notebook through a schedule, effectively a minimal pipeline in Python in about 6 minutes. Thank you very much.